Hi everyone, I'm Orlandini and today we're gonna see how to create this Windows-like product render in Blender. So let's get started. Let's start with a new file, and the first thing we're gonna need is to delete our default cube. Then we're gonna need to import our Microsoft Surface laptop. I have done a 3D model for you that you can download for free with the link in the description. It's a very simple model made in Fusion 360 and that I already imported into Blender, so we're gonna need to bring it from another scene into this, and I'm gonna show you how to do it. So let's go to File, let's go to Append. We're gonna need to get our folder that you've downloaded before with the link in the description, as I mentioned before. Then you're gonna need to click on Surface Laptop and click on Append, go to Collection, get our Microsoft Surface collection and click Append. And here we are with our beautiful 3D model. Now to create the sand behind our laptop, we're gonna need to add a plane. Then we're gonna need to change the dimension to 3.8 for 3.8. Next, you're gonna need to subdivide it, so I'm gonna cut it up like 60 times. Perfect. The next thing we're gonna need is to apply the scale of this plane. Then we're gonna need to add our dunes to this sand. So let's go to the modifier, add a displacement modifier, perfect. Next thing we're gonna need is to go to the texture properties, click on new, click on open, and let's get our displacement texture. Then I'm gonna leave you as always in the description. So I'm gonna open the image. Then I'm gonna need to change with this our coordinates to UV, and then we're gonna need to change our strength to minus 0.015 and our mid-level all the way up to 1. Then we're gonna need to shade smooth. Okay, perfect. So now, as we can see, is not really perfect, so we have to subdivide it like 2 times more. Perfect. Then we're gonna need to add a subdivision surface. We're gonna bring it to 2, and here we are with our perfect sand. So the next thing we're gonna need is to set up our camera. So I'm gonna select it and I'm gonna bring it all the way to the right position. So let's turn down the location to minus 0.3. The epsilon location is minus 0.65. The Z, we're gonna need to bring it down to 0.3. Then we're gonna need our rotation to 68 degrees, sorry. And the Z to minus 25. Perfect. The next thing we're gonna need is, as always, to get a vertical split. We're gonna deselect this and this. I'm gonna click T and N to hide everything. And by clicking 0 on the numpad, we can see what camera sees. So that's simply perfect. So next, we're gonna need to change our render engine into Cycle, Experimental, GPU Compute. As I mentioned before, we can add our denoiser, and if you have an RTX graphic card, you can activate OptiX, otherwise it will work fine anyway. Okay, perfect. Then here we can see with the Cycle render engine what camera sees. So the next thing we're gonna need is to add our lights. So I'm gonna bring in a new area light, and I'm gonna change the position, changing it with the X by 1.7, the Y 0.1, and the Z 0.4. Then we're gonna need to change our Y rotation by 81 degrees, and here we are. The next thing we're gonna need is to change our power to 35 watt, and here we are. Next, we can duplicate our first area light, and we're gonna need to set our second area light. So the X will be 1.1 minus 1.1, sorry, the Y 1.3, and the Z 0.6. Perfect. Then we're gonna need to change our rotation, so minus 25 degrees, 65 degrees, and 104 degree for the Z. And here we are. The third and last light we're gonna need is our point light, so we're gonna select our default point light. Sorry, I forget to mention that we need to change our power to 100. So let's change our power to 100. And then the last thing we're gonna need is to change our point light. So let's change it up. So 0.6, 2.3, and 0.4 with a power of 4. Perfect. This will be our accent light on the logo, but we're gonna see it later when we create the materials for the laptop. So the next thing we're gonna need is to change our color management by changing the look to medium-high contrast, and we start to see something really cool without materials. So let's go with the materials. The first material we're gonna need is the background material, the environment material. So we're gonna need to go to shading, go to word. Then we're gonna need to change our background color by importing a sky texture. Let's drag it in. Then we're gonna need to change it to Hosek. I'm gonna change it to 2. And on ground elb to 0.54. Perfect. And now strength down to 0.3. Just perfect. So then we're gonna need to create our materials for the laptop. So we're gonna need to go down here, go to material, create a new material, call it metal laptop material. Then we need to go to shading, go to object. Then we can start with our material. So let's drag in a noise texture. So now we're gonna need to use Node Wrangler. So if you don't have activated yet, follow me now. So go to edit, preferences, search for Node Wrangler, and you need to check it if you don't have checked it yet. So now that we have activated it, we just need to click on Ctrl T, and we're gonna need to get our next texture coordinate. Let's change the object into vector. So now we can get our color ramp. Let's bring the factor into the factor and the color into the roughness. Then we can bump up our scale to like 10,000 to get a really small imperfections. Then we can change our position a little bit. Next, change our details to all the way to 0, our roughness all the way up to 1, and our distortion to 1, 2. Then we're gonna need to get our material metallic. Here we are, and here we start to see something. Then I'm gonna need to change our base color a little bit by dragging it up a little bit, but like this it works just fine. So the next thing we're gonna need is to get a second material for our Windows logo. So let's go down here, let's create a new material and call it logo material. Then we're gonna need to go into the tab mode, into the edit mode. Let's select our Windows faces and let's assign our new material. Next thing we're gonna need is to bump up all the way up to 1 our metallic and all the way to 0 our roughness. And here we are. As you can see now, we start to see something more realistic. Okay, perfect. So the next thing we're gonna need is to open up a little bit our monitor. So let's bring it up a little bit, just a little, like this. It's just perfect like this. So the next thing we're gonna need is our sand material. So let's go down here, let's create a new material, call it sand material, and let's start. So let's go to shading, and here we have some critical parts, but nothing so difficult. Just follow me and we're gonna get a perfect sand material. So let's start with a noise texture. Let's get Ctrl T, then add a color ramp, and let's drag the factor into the factor and the color into the base color, and we start to get something. Next thing we're gonna need is to change our scale to 2, our detail all the way up to 50, our roughness to 0.25, and down distortion like to 7. And we start to see something on our sand. The next thing we're gonna need is to create our textures for the grain of the sand. So let's add a Voronoi texture. Let's add Ctrl T to get the node wrangler. Let's add a color ramp. Drag the color into the factor. Let's add a bump node. Here we are. And now we're gonna also need a noise texture with our Voronoi texture. So let's add a mix RGB. Let's drag the color of the color ramp down here, the color into the height, and the normal into the normal. And then we're gonna need to add a noise texture that we're gonna also connect with the color into the second color. Then we're gonna need to change our factor to 0.94, and here we are, we start to see something. Then we're gonna need to change our bump strength all the way down to 0.28 and our distance up to 5.6. Then we're gonna need to change some values on our texture. So let's bring this K all the way up to 6000, and we can start to see the sand. Then we can change our F1 to smooth F1, and we start to see something. Change our smoothness to 0.65. Then we're gonna need to change our noise texture to a scale of 30, a detail of 15, a roughness of 0.3, and here we are. Let's drag our color ramp black position all the way to 0.2. Here we are, and we can start to see something now. So the next thing we're gonna need is to bump up our roughness all the way to 1, our metallic to 0.015. So next we need to change the color ramp color to give the sand the color we want. So let's change the first color to hex, and I'm gonna give you the hex code. So this is the hex code if you want to copy it, otherwise you can choose what color you want. Here we are. The next color we're gonna need is seven. For our subsurface color, we're gonna need to get 917. Perfect. Let's change our positions. So here we are with our sand material. And as you can see now, we start to get something really close to what Windows renders looks like. But if you want to do something more, I'm gonna show you how to use our geometry nodes to add some details to this sand. If you don't have a computer with high performances, you could find difficult to follow this part of the tutorial, but you can try to follow it, and if your computer doesn't follow you, you can simply skip this part and the render will be fine anyway. I'm gonna give you something more than what you can expect for the render. So let's go with something more. So let's create our grains of sand. So we need a new mesh. Let's create a cube. Let's scale down. Okay. Then we're gonna need to change the dimensions to 0.001 for all the three dimensions. Here we are with little grain of sand. So now we need to add a little bevel, and for doing it we're gonna need to apply our scale. Then we're gonna need to change the amount to like 0.0001, maybe something more like 0.3, something like this. Let's add our segments. Here we are, just perfect. Let's get it to smooth. So now let's add our geometry node. Let's create a new geometry node. Let's go into geometry nodes. And here we are. Let's get started. So we're gonna do something really simple, but that will works fine with this type of render. So let's add a new distribute points on face. Here we are, and we start to see something. Then we're gonna need to get an instances on point. Here we are, and then we're gonna need to re-get our plane. So let's get a join geometry and drag it our plane. So now we have the plane back. Then we're gonna need to get some instances inside our instance on points, and we're gonna need to import our object info of our little cube that we're gonna rename it sand grain. Here we are. Let's spin it. So if we change the object that we are looking, we still see our geometry node on our plane. Then we're gonna import our model by dragging it in, and now we have our object info of our grain of sand. Then we're gonna drag it to the instance. Then we're gonna need to add a math node that we're gonna change to multiply, and we're gonna bring the value into the density, and let's add a new value by dragging it in into the group input so that we can have our new value down here. Then we're gonna multiply it by like 10,000. Perfect. And now we start to see something, our little grains down here. But for now they have all the same rotation and scale. So we need to add some random values to like get some realistic effect from it. So let's create a new random value, and let's duplicate it. Then we're gonna need to change it to vector, and we're gonna bring it in into the rotation, and then we're gonna need to get our float value into the scale by changing our maximum value to 0.8, and from here we can change our density for what we like. So if we want to go up like 2, we're gonna see a lot of grains of sand. For me 2 is just perfect. So now I can hide it from the view, so it's gonna return simply perfect. So now we're gonna need to create a super simple material for our sand grain. So let's create a new material. Let's call it sand grain material. Then we're gonna need to change our base color to something like this, change our subsurface color to something like this. Let's bring our subsurface to like 0.1. Let's turn all the way up the roughness, and let's bring metallic to 0.015. So the next thing we're gonna need is to hide our sand grain to the render, and then we're gonna need to change a little bit our light just to get some more reflection on our Windows logo. So let's get it down here and down here, and as you can see now, we start to see something on our screen. Now we can change our render image to double the size of the execution and double the size for the epsilon location. Then we can change our max samples to something like 1024, and we're gonna hit render. So now that we have our render done, we can go with the last part of the video. So we're gonna need to go to the compositing. We need to use node. Then we're gonna need to get our vertical split that we're gonna need to change to the image editor, and we're gonna click on render result. So here we are what render sees. Then we're gonna need to add some simple node, so we need to add a little glare, change to fog, go to high, then change our threshold to 4. Then we're gonna need some bright contrast, so let's bring the contrast to 2. And the last thing we're gonna need is a lens distortion with a dispersion of 0.01. So this is the final result. I hope you like it. If you want to see more, just subscribe to the channel, and if you have any question or advice for something you want to see next in the channel, please leave a comment below. If you like the video, please click on the like button, and we will see in the next video. Bye bye!